what will be setting base for conversation this morning. Well, as Israel kept bombing Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a political rival Benny Gantz announced an emergency government for the duration of the conflict. Joint announcement came after Israeli soldiers sweeping battle-torn southern town said they had found 1,200 victims 5 days after the Hamas militants' onslaught, the worst attack in Israel's 75 years history. Only power plant in the Gaza Strip, which is under Israeli bombardment and siege, has been shut down after it ran out of fuel. And this comes as religious leaders here in Kenya have also raised their voices in unity, echoing the divine message of peace and love for all humanity, and to advocate for the cessation of all violent and military activities that bring harm to both Palestinian and Israeli civilians.
Prevailing situation continues to resort into murder and what can be defined as unfathomable pain and suffering, especially by women and children, and of course the massive destruction of properties. We further call for a ceasefire to de-escalate the violence and appeal for a peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians, because they are actually neighbors.
Well, that's what we have it. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu joining with a top political rival yesterday to create what is known as a wartime cabinet to oversee the fight to avenge what they say was a gruesome weekend attack by the Hamas militants. And of course, the war cabinet is a body within this new emergency unity government and consists of the Prime Minister, his Defense Minister, and opposition leader Benny Gantz. The war has already claimed at least 2,300 lives on both sides. Palestinians' health ministry in Gaza reporting in its latest update about an hour ago that the death toll in Gaza has also risen to 1,200. Thousands others have been wounded in the attacks. Tens of thousands fleeing their homes. The UN saying that more than 300,000 people displaced within Gaza as the bombing raids continue. The conditions, of course, in the densely populated enclave where more than 2 million people live are increasingly desperate, and the people have nowhere to go. If I can be able to take a look at a tweet here that was put out by the United Secretary General Antonio Guterres, just very quickly on the situation there. Let's see, this is what he had to say this morning. I think, he tweeted about 2:47 a.m. Kenyan time, and he says that crucial life-saving supplies, including fuel, food and water, must be allowed into Gaza. We need rapid and unimpeded humanitarian access right now. He also says that he calls for the immediate release of all hostages held in Gaza. Civilians must be protected at all times, and international humanitarian law must be respected and upheld. Well, there have been a number of statements that have been put out by leaders across the world. Let's just listen into what the U.S. president had to say, then we'll get into our discussion.
That Israel, with all the anger, frustration, and just I don't know how to explain it, that exists, is that they operate by the rules of war. The rules of war. And there are rules of war. Already we're surging additional military assistance to the Israeli Defense Force, including ammunition, interceptors to replenish the Iron Dome, and we've moved the U.S. carrier fleet to the Eastern Mediterranean, and we're sending more fighter jets there in that region. And made it clear to the Iranians, be careful.
Well, that's the U.S. President Joe Biden. They are talking about the rules of war and that they must be adhered by all sides with regard to the situation there between the Israel and Palestinians and, of course, specifically Gaza. Well, as the world watches this unfold, there has been suddenly also a huge focus on the human cost. We've seen the United Nations talk about more than 200,000 people displaced out of their homes, more fleeing, and of course many others injured from both sides, and also calling for the release of hostages in Gaza that were taken by the Hamas militants. That is what sparked the violence that we have seen happening since Saturday last week. Dr. Abdi Samad, you gave us a bit of a historical background of the situation there. But now you're looking at the humanitarian issue that is now unfolding, which is quite devastating from both angles. We've seen that there's bombardment as well from the Hamas militants yesterday. So this doesn't look like a conflict that is about to really end at this point.
Zainab, normally the media, Western media and African media, they're focusing on Hamas, what they have done. Of course, Hamas is a terror organization. But the reality is 5,600 Palestinians are in jail. 1,260 of them, they don't know why they are here. Israel, they bombing day and night in Gaza. They brought out high-rise, apartments.
Buildings.
They brought out into the ground. They systematically killing the children, women, and elderly, hospitals, schools. You mention it. No one cannot talk about these issues.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is the finance minister, the current finance minister of Israel, publicly said, Palestinians, there are three options: migrate, or accept subjugations, or die. But BP, what has done BP? He brought the map of Israel at the UN Security Council, UN General Assembly. In fact, he is going to annex both Gaza and West Bank into Israel. The whole thing, the whole notion is to annex Gaza and West Bank, so that he is going to conclude the Palestinian project once and for all. And that's exactly what is going on. When you have 560 checkpoints, military checkpoints inside what they call West Bank, when you have 224, Islamists separated by each other within what they call within the West Bank, what else will you expect those guys? Tell me, what else will you expect those guys? The issue is, if today Ukraine, the Americans, the US, and the Europeans are supporting Ukraine, do you know why? They are saying, Russia occupied by Ukraine. So why are they denying the occupation of what they call the Israelis into Palestine? What's the difference between Ukraine and Palestine? We tied the double standard of the West. We tied the hypocrisy of the highest order. Every media houses, if you look at whether it's a Western or non-Western, they are talking about the Hamas. In 1993, according to Oslo Accord, Palestinian Liberation Organization, they recognize Israel as a state. Since 2000, the last time they met the BLO was 2000. Now, the BLO, which is the official representative of Palestine, they are the siege. This situation is a direct result of the brutal occupation, of Israel, systematic expansion of the settlements, denying the right of return. All those issues, if you put together, you see the gloomy picture. So why the European Union, together with the US, are not even blaming, condemning 560 Palestinians are in jail. 1,260, they don't know why they're there. And administrative, what you call, detention order. So, they reduce the Palestinian populations into woodcutters, shopkeepers and shoe shiners. The subjugation, the level of subjugation of the Palestinians, you can't imagine. And no one cannot talk about these issues.
But the escalation.
Let me tell you one thing. Let me conclude this issue. Israel, now they are going to have a good relation with Arab states. Already they have a good relation with Egypt. Also now they're starting, to have a good relation with Gulf states. In addition to that, Morocco, and you mentioned it. You know, they want to conclude the Palestinian project once and for all. So the issue is, why the whole world, why is it a double standard? If Palestinian today, if anyone who has, you know, if they seek their own freedom militarily, they are terrorists. If they go to the demonstrations, the street, they call the advocating for violence. They do the violent. If they struggle through words, that's a provocation. If you today, you know, if you today, Professor Bashar Monena support Palestinians, they will call it anti-Semitic. That's anti-Semitic. So the whole narrative, choose the whole narrative. This is, you know, the only solution is, you know, according to the Oslo Accord, 1999, Palestine, it has to be independent state. The only solution is two-state solution, with part of 1967, whereby the Israelis and Palestinians, they live together side by side in harmony and peaceful. So Israel, they don't want to even to hear those issues. Up to now, but you know, according to Oslo Accord, the what you call the agreement was, let, you know, Palestinian Authority form a government in West Bank. Israel roll back the what you call the occupation, stop the settlements. This year alone, don't forget other years. This year alone, they build 13,000 houses. So you know the place
so
Palestinians between her place and rock.
It's just about the issue of occupation. That is what has led to the situation.
Nothing else. And say annexation of the Gaza and the West Bank. That's all.
All right.
Yeah.
Muliro, do you read from the same script that perhaps why we've seen the escalation of the conflict to this extent is basically tied to the issue of Israeli occupation of Gaza?
You know that I was just, I've seen one of your writers talking about we need a new world information order.
Right.
And I think it's important, he's right, because the docu has talked about that, and the story of Israel-Palestine has become muddled. Information space is one-sided and inundated with what we don't know whether it is true or false. Historians, maybe Professor Mashere will help us, historians have a different story that from what we are being told.
Right.
So it is, when you look at even the approach of the UN trying, although now the UN has been put on the back burner and the powerful state, the US is leading in front, you'll see that the idea has been clear. Everybody knows that we need a two-state solution. And when it was suggested, you could see that some people, Palestinians, will find themselves on the side of Israel, some Israelites, the Jews, will find themselves on the other side there. But looking at all the events, you will see that to some level, I'll go back to what I just mentioned, that the Palestinians feel like the international community is, you know, you are a child of the world, and the world looks like it is treating you as a second child of the world, and therefore those are the pathways to resisted movements that have been classified now as terrorism. You have no other way of dealing with that, so you look for the vulnerable targets to pass your message. But you know, when you look at many of the talks, you'll find that if you follow very much, somehow Palestine has ceded a lot, has compromised so much. And there's only one thing that is required of, I think, Israel, is to accept that that part of the world belongs to the Palestinians, as the world has been saying, and pull back. But the biggest concern, which is also valid for Israel, is that I think the highest challenge came with the fact that the Gaza was occupied by a group that has been globally classified as terrorists. And therefore, if you look at even the response of Egypt, Egypt was supposed to come out clearly, but Egypt struggles in the same way as Israel to make sure that that zone is totally closed away from the movement of arms and weapons to a group that is believed to be a terrorist organization. And you can see that's why Egypt stands almost neutral. And I was listening, you know, the world is talking about the largest open prison, where Prof here is talking about almost 5,000, you know, large open prison, that some people want to leave Gaza, but they cannot leave. And they are told that the only exit, maybe you go through Egypt. And Egypt does not want that. You know, opening there, you are opening yourself to infiltration by a group that has been classified as terrorist. So the whole thing is so much muddled that I believe, in my view, if this conflict will be protracted, we are going to see more of backlashes, especially for Africa. We pray that it should be short and solved and we go back to the usual low-key discussions and the rest. But if it is protracted and the way some states have come out openly to take positions, we will arm them, we will send jet fighters. I was listening to the president of the US, and then you listen to the Arab world and you listen to the other groups, armed groups saying we want a passage to reach Gaza and help our brothers.
Right.
Then, if it is protracted, we are going to see maybe around three things, especially for this part of the world called Africa. One, reigniting of the sleeper cells of violent extremist groups. Right. Because now there is a mobilization element where it will be easier, there will be increased recruitment of people, movement of fighters towards that zone there. There will be increased mobilization of finances. People will be now willing to finance and say our people are being killed on either side there. And therefore, it is something that Africa cannot watch from a distance, especially even for Kenya itself, by taking position. Do we expect, you know, we may need to increase even our surveillance because we might face more attacks as people or terrorist groups target American installations in the country here. So if that war takes long, we may rewind and go back to our insecurity, which we had tried to, you know, to improve. But this will be because of the global happening.
All right.
Yes.
And I mean, you've given quite a context there. And I mean, Professor Munene, suddenly there is a growing sense that this might shift things not in the region, particularly in that part of the world, a risk of perhaps a regional conflict. We've seen questions of Iran being drawn into that conversation as well. What is your sense of, in case of any escalation of the conflict between, you know, Israel and Gaza?
It's likely to escalate despite the effort to avoid the escalation. Iran has stated very clearly that it is not involved in this and does not seem to want to be involved, although it empathizes with the Gaza people, but does not want to be drawn into that. They have those who want to draw it in and then escalate it in a bigger way. So that's a possibility. Other countries are also watching. They sympathize with Palestine, but they really don't want to be officially part of the conflict. What we have are groups, supposedly independent groups, saying they want to help their brothers and sisters in Palestine. But touching on one of the issues about the information, the PR, the claims why the information seems to be so skewed, the media is generally hostile to Palestine or the Palestinians. I think what you have is a sense of guilt on the part of the Western powers for having committed all the atrocities they committed against the Jews, which led to the creation of the World Zionist Organization. And Hitler thinks that sense of guilt makes the West hesitant to come up and call and say these things are not acceptable. The UN, it's not the first time it has suggested splitting Palestine. It did that in 1947, and the whole thing did not work. So all those things saying that two-state is kind of going back to the 1940s. But one of the main questions that comes up, since Israel controls the Gaza, every point, they supposed to know everything that goes on in those places.
Yeah.
How come Israel was caught flat-footed, especially when its intelligence network is supposed to be among the best, the Mossad? So the question that comes up, how did that happen?
That has been quite a big question, actually, right?
Yeah, because they control everything. So what's going on? One of the effect that it has had is that Ukraine has stopped being news in the process. And so pay more attention to the fighting in Palestine and forget about Ukraine. It's no longer news, given the way it is. And then another issue that comes up, will the ICC indict people in Israel the way it purported to indict Vladimir Putin in Russia? Will they? Nope. The answer is that they will not, which I think Dr. was talking about the hypocrisy of the whole thing. It's confusing and does not make these world bodies look very credible, and give credit to those who have been complaining about the irresponsibility of responsible organs, which are selective in how they call for the enforcement of international law, for the enforcement of agreements and things like that. So you have that problem. But it goes back to what we started on earlier. It appears this is a 3,000-year conflict, supposedly involving Abraham and his 3 wives, Hagar, Ishmael's descendants, so said, and Isaac and Sarai with Isaac and his descendants, and then forgotten in between is Keturah, the 3rd wife, and her 6 boys. What happens to? And so they all claim that place, and so they keep on arguing. It sounds like a family feud as to who has a right to be there. And in the process of doing that, they forget the people who were there before Abraham showed up.
That's it.
Who was there? And they have forgotten. So it's a very complex matter. And it exposes the weaknesses, the rot in some of the current systems that people claim to be world order. It means that there is world disorder. Right. Because there is no agreement, there is no belief, there is no attachment to sanctity of what people claim to be. So that disorder makes the media and others present stories that are one-sided or not as thorough as they should be. So once people start taking positions, I'm pro-Israeli, I'm pro-Palestine, and you expect that the stories will be presented that way, rather than looking at the hard facts as to what it is that's going on. The reality is that Israel controls all those places, and it has minute information about them. So as we were asking, how did it get caught flat-footed? It's a big question. It is.
Yes, Dr. Abdi-Wahab.
Yes.
Certainly, that is a question that many have asked, how they might have not seen this coming, but also looking at the issues of the laws that really govern the conflict. Then there's that, we already have rules of armed conflict that came out of the 1949 Geneva Convention, which ratify UN member states and supplemented by rulings at international war crimes tribunals. Where does this, the complex nature of this particular conflict fall when it comes to execution of the international laws that are supposed to guide this conflict?
Zainab, 2.5 million people in Gaza. Today, they don't have electricity, they don't have water, they don't have food, they don't have what they call medical supplies, they don't have, literally, they siege in air, in land, in sea. That's what they call systematic disregard of international law. Israel, they are not respecting international law. International law is only applies to Palestinians, nothing else. Let me tell you one thing. The entire population of Gaza, now they are so desperate. They are between hard place and rock. They don't have a hope. In fact, they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. They became the entire population hopeless under the watch of the European Union, under the watch of the US government, under the watch of those who support what they call the Israeli occupation in Palestine. The question is, Geneva, the rules of engagement, they are not, in fact, Israel, they don't consider it, because they're saying, if the finance minister says you have 3 options, immigrate, or accept subjugation, or die in front of the camera. So where is now, who is going to disregard the international law?
But did the Hamas militant group also disregard international law when they launched that attack on Israel? And then so when Israel says this is our way of retaliating against such kind of an attack, isn't that perhaps a recourse to that situation?
What Hamas did for the last 1 week is that they're doing almost 56 years. 56 years. And no one cannot talk about this issue. No one cannot talk about this issue. That's a reality. That's a fact. So the issue of the international law, in fact, is not applied in that part of the world. And everybody knows that. So right now, what we have seen today in Middle East, specifically in Palestine, it is a kind of apartheid regime where the racism, what you call subjugations, force, in fact, what they have done is against international law. It's against the convention, Geneva Convention. So what else would you expect the Palestinians? In fact, Palestinians, Gaza is an open air prison. Open air prison. When they're killing the people, they're destroying what they call the buildings. They're destroying the families. They're killing the children. They're killing the women. They're killing what they call. And no one cannot talk about this issue. And everybody, the Western world leaders, they came in front of camera just a crocodile tears for Israelis. What let's be real. Let me tell you one thing. Say that we have to resolve this issue practically. Forget the rhetoric. Forget what they call hypocrisy. It cannot work. What is work for them today is two-state solution. With board of 1967, let the Palestinians and Israelis live together, peace in harmony. That's only solution.
But how do you achieve that?
It is simple. It is simple. Let the European Union, let Chinese, let Russians, let
so the international you want the international community to be responsible to create some sort of...
What we have seen today in Palestine or Israel, both are radical groups. Both of them. Hamas is a radical group. Bibi is a radical prime minister. That's the reality. They cannot solve any problems. There is no what they call wisdom. There is no statesmanship. So the only now is the role of the international community is to mediate this between the two. Let them come up a comprehensive peace program whereby the Palestinians and Israelis can live together. If you allow Bibi to continue this kind of things, I'm telling you, I'm telling you, the world is at a war. We are almost now third world war.
Bwana Muliro, do you think we're looking at, you know, that kind of an escalation where the fighting would reach the levels of a war that the world will have to all intervene?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that our prayers should be, there should be immediate move to stop the escalation. The joy of it is that whenever the matter of Israel rises, not even Israel-Palestine, those who control the world powers move very fast. It attracts a lot of attention. But the fear is if it is protracted, then we expect not just, as you have said, Africa is divided, but the global division. And it has generated several levels of division. First, we have now religious division. Even just come in Kenya, you saw the Christians giving a statement, and you could read within the statement that they are aligning themselves with the Israelites. For those historical issues of the Bible.
One issue,
on the other side,
one issue, with due respect.
Yes, yes.
Palestinians, they are both Christian and Muslims.
Yes, yes.
Israel, even they're destroying the churches, leave alone the mosques. So the issue of the Christian allying with Israel is not. In fact, I'm not buying that one. Both Palestinians are Christians. Like them of them are Christians. Continue.
Yes. So these are the optics. Even as Doc says that this is the sentiment that runs among the people. Even just speak Kenya, and do a survey even on WhatsApp, or look at the states that are supporting. Look at even Zambia. You know, Zambia, the leader is born again Christian, and you can see how the position they take. So that is one level of division. Then another level that has come in is that level of the Arab world. Now we move away from the religious, the Arab world, and the entry of the Western powers led by the US is an idea that is growing very fast automatically, except for Egypt and Morocco. And for the reasons of the alliance with the US, we have seen them neutral. But automatically, everywhere, you'll see that the Arab world is on the side of the Palestinians, and then the other side is on the side of the US, looking very angry. And I would like to say this, actually. You are mentioning about international law. I would like to say this, that I agree with the statement of the PS, Dr. Korir, the Kenyan PS, that even on one side, as we are angry about terrorist activities, but then where is the principle of proportionality? This is not the first time. You know, when we were growing up, we knew that they always said that if you kill one Israelite, then they'll make sure they kill 77 or something there in retaliation. Is that proportional in terms of international law? It's not, and nobody is bringing that. And that's why we still go back and say, what has happened to the information, the information order in the world? We have been told, we hear about that, there is the largest open prison. We have been told that even there is apartheid. I was listening to the South African statements that there is a tunnel where you'll be told Palestinians, you'll pass through these airports, and then the Israelites in this case. Why has that not been brought out very clearly with heavy representation globally for people to understand? It's just the same thing that it is miffed. It has been going on. But whenever there is now escalation is when we come up and try to look at that. And the question is that the World Information Order, who controls it and for who? Does it contribute to peace, or does it continue contributing to geopolitical selfish interests of a few? And that is why I think whoever says we need a new information order, world information order, was right in the nation here. You know, I'm looking at even Israel itself. For how long? You know, it's very hard. Even African states with their own rudimentary tools were able to resist the mighty Britain and the colonialists. For how long will you hold this position that you can actually restrain fellow human beings in a level that puts them not to that level of humanity. Because look at this. Israel has opened so many fronts of war that you have the Hamas, you have the Hezbollah, you have a crisis, Golan Heights near Syria. So you are thinning yourself out with all this. So for how long will you believe that the Western power will hold you? The easiest shortcut to have peace in mind is let the people, as they say, let my people go. Decide, you know the history, you know the reality. Everybody, even in Palestine itself, Palestine is not controlled by the Hamas. Politically, it's a rival group. Yes, and we have the political system, the government that runs it there. And so, therefore, in this state, we look at this and say that even your obsession with the terror attacks and the Hamas should not be a reason to collectively punish the entire society of Palestinians. We are looking at this and we're asking ourselves that what is the link between the fact that there has been a terrorist attack? Even for Kenya here, when we were facing attacks and we knew they were emanating from Somalia, could it give us a right to literally go in Somalia and bomb anybody that we imagine is a citizen of Somalia? Those are the issues that the global world should be looking at, and not the divisions that Doc does not want to agree, but those are the divisions that lie at the back of the mind of all those thinkers globally. All right. Yes. Yes,
and I think time we take just another short break. When we come back, we wind up on that conversation. Talk to us, the hashtag #AMLiveNTV. We're going to be back in a short while.
Karibuni, hii ndio base ya the best local entertainment. Baby,
tumefungulia Magic. Starting from the 7th of October, Maisha Magic Plus will be on DSTV Access and GoTV Plus.
As a man, the way I handle my finances is more about thinking of the future. So as a young person who has had a father, it's thinking of the long game. So every penny that I get right now is going straight to my savings, hopefully to get more so that I can invest it. So I think as a man, that's how most of us think. Kama ufikiri hivyo, kuna kashida mahali. My name is Kevin Miner. I'll see you on the 3rd edition of the Man Cave on 28th of October. I can't wait. It's a man's affair. So see you then.
Benefits of ordering with Glovo. Glovo allows you to order anything you want at the comfort and convenience of your home. Craving fried chicken, or pilau, or pizza? Easy and simple. Order on Glovo today. Glovo. Order anything, we deliver in minutes.
With Glovo, you've got the city at your fingertips. Unajisikia kukula kitu different? Order Glovo. I'ma treat the family with a sweet surprise. Download Glovo and get anything you want in minutes.
Time to step out, get down and jam down. Ride into reggae, raga, roots, and everything that makes you say wagwan. They talk about radio silence. We don't know what that's about. We jam up the volume and the vibes on your radio on 96.3 Nation FM. We take a ride to the hood. Jumtani, ndio mambo iko na design ya kivyake. Jam down mtaani. Tunaingia mtaa wako na tunaguziana na watu wetu. Kiroma ni muhimu, na pia ni muhimu kujiupdate na nini kina trend kwa zone ya reggae. Hapa ni Jam Down Vibes. We jam down way past when the sun goes down. And that's how it goes down. Jam Down style on 96.3 Nation. Every Saturday from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Then at 10 p.m. on NTV.
Want to know the biggest story of the week? Do not worry. The weekly review got you covered. For in-depth analysis of politics, business, governance, as well as social issues, the Weekly Review covers it all. For well-researched, exclusive and investigative content, read the Weekly Review every Sunday in the Sunday Nation.
Rodrigo had it coming. He got between Diego and Natalia, taking Diego's place, lying to her and doing it behind her back.
What chances do we have to prove that Rodrigo attacked me that night?
It's almost impossible.
And why?
I need time to find my daughter and to give it to my wife as a present. Help me, please, Pablo.
I just got robbed and I'm really terrified about what happened. They took all of my money away.
Well, if that's the case, then tell me, why didn't they take your handbag?
Head over heels.
Following the gazettement of Two Rivers as a private, services-focused special economic zone, the first one of the kind in Kenya, there is no better time to own a home at Two Rivers than now. Text the word Cascadia to 22365.
All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching AM Live this morning as we canvass around the Israel-Gaza conflict that has escalated since Saturday. And of course, just looking at also what that may have in terms of the impact on our continent as Africa. Professor Macharia Munene, if you're still with us, so we have these divergent stances adopted by the different African states, like what has been captured on the Daily Nation this morning. Do you think this might perhaps strain diplomatic relations and impede collaboration as African states on critical matters, including, regional challenges that we face, even in conflicts in other areas of Africa as well, that perhaps we should have taken one stance as a continent on this particular matter?
I think he's not there.
All right. So I think Prof will be joining us just shortly. But yes, Muliro, like we were just having that conversation before we took, when we were taking that break and came back. I mean, yes, have we gotten Prof?
Yes. Did he get the question?
All right. So Prof, I don't know if you had my question, but yes, it really just focuses on the issue of the stances we've adopted on the different states in Africa, and really when we're pushing for one voice, one African voice. Will this impede, will this challenge, our relations, diplomatic relations with each other as a continent?
Yes, it will have some effect in the sense that the disagreements are likely to be very deep. Mm-hmm. Question of belief. Already Kenya appears to be isolated when it comes to African-related issues, although it's not the first time that it would appear to be that way. So it will have some effect, given the passion and emotions involved in this. So the suspicions that already exist are likely to intensify. How much should Tanzania or Somalia or Sudan consider what Kenya says? We already know that Sudan and Kenya are not in good books with each other. And then you have these other countries that tend to think that Kenya is a proxy of some Western powers. And so it has a challenge of trying to extricate itself from that image of being a proxy or Nyapara system. When that is the case, you go and talk to somebody and they just look at you sideways and wonder what you are up to and whether you've been sent to go and do that. So yes, diplomatic relations between Kenya and other African countries, and not just Kenya, but all the countries, they are all suspicious of each other, mainly because what's going on in Gaza and Israel is very emotive. And it's hard to say that he's to blame because he's to blame, according to you, and no, it's the other one to blame, according to somebody else. it will take time to heal, because it has brought in some injuries, diplomatic injuries in the continent. And it's very difficult to speak with one voice when deep beliefs are involved. And deep beliefs are now involved in this. And it's a struggle to say that there is one African voice for all the 54 countries. And when we know that they think they are different in some ways.
Would we need one African voice because of the magnitude of the situation and an international issue at that point? Or Kenya would have perhaps its own right to make a stance on this particular matter as an individual African state, devoid of what the African Union perhaps would take if it's different from what Kenya believes in?
Well, that brings up the conflict of ideals. As a country, Kenya has a right to make its own position clear, what it stands for, irrespective of what any other country thinks. That's Kenya's right. And every other country has the same right. It's not just Kenyan. That then is in conflict with collective ideals, the ideas of Pan-Africanism. Can we have one because we have been oppressed together, mainly as Africans, therefore we should have one common understanding on a particular issue. That's an ideal which often is in conflict with the other ideal of national interest of a particular country as they are perceived by the leaders.
And
it is not unique in Africa because we have seen that before. Whenever there is a conflict between universal, continental, or other collective ideals, like international law, which is usually created by big powers for small countries to obey. Whenever there is a conflict between those ideals that are supposed to be universal and the national interests of particular countries as perceived by leaders, often national interests prevail because each has to deal with its own And when you read some of the strategic documents by any of these countries, any of them, doesn't matter which one, the emphasis is always very clear that when it's national interest, and national security is part of that national interest, are in conflict with what some other entities believe or claim or say, the ideal now, then the national interest as perceived at the time prevail. And they said, the US is very clear on that, and the Russians and the Chinese, they say what other people think is irrelevant, as long as it is in the interest
of their own
the particular country.
Right.
And we have had to deal with that before. A good example is when you are proclaiming the new constitution. And we invited Omar Bashir to come and witness that event. And there were some people say, oh, arrest him, which was kind of a non-starter, because the national interest of Kenya at the time were to secure the independence of Southern Sudan. And because Bashir was in a position to sabotage the whole thing if he wanted to, because he's the one who had to give the instruments of independence to South Sudan, it made sense, get assurance for him that it will go as agreed all the way. And, he did it. In that sense, you look at it, what was Kenya's interest at the time? That was it, and it was primary. What was the ideal? Was the ICC ideal, which makes no sense because of the way it has been behaving. So, and they have always said, the British have said, the Americans have said, they'll never try. Otherwise, they'll blow the Hague to Stone Age. So, a conflict between ideals and national interests. It's always the national interest as perceived by the leaders that count. So in this case, the continental agenda, whatever it is, because it's not even clear what it is.
All right.
when it is in conflict with the national agenda, then each country decides its best foot forward.
Okay. Muliro, yes.
I think the Prof has reminded me one thing, that states pursue their own interests, national interests stand higher. And even from the statement of the PS, you'll see that he's citing the history of Kenya being a victim of terrorism. But then we also need, as you pursue your national interests, remember that they may easily be impeded or affected by the geopolitics, that is the geographical location and the politics within your neighborhood. And therefore, that's why states sometimes struggle to have the collective ideals of the region or the globe. They form organizations in that case. The African Union, from the time of the OAU, had a position on the Palestine-Israel. Palestine is actually recognized by the Africans collectively through their organization. The African countries, including Kenya, have allowed Palestine to have their embassies, missions across there. And therefore, we are looking at this and asking ourselves that there is a story about Africa, which historians have cited, that whenever we make a decision, we are reminded about our history of colonialism, our history of slave trade, our shared history of oppression. And therefore, we tend to have that idea that we have this history, we should always be sympathetic to any other group that faces the same history that we faced. And that is the idea behind those South Africa speaking very strongly, that we have that history of just come from that. Namibia speaking very strongly and saying that in whatever conflict you have, we should always keep an eye on the fact that humanity should never suffer colonialism, oppression, discrimination, and racism of all that form. But then you look at Kenya. At the time, historically, Kenya has a very strong relationship with Israel. And this has always been linked to the fears of terrorism. You remember that at one time, I don't know, Prof should be, Prof here will help me, whether it was to our interests or it was a diplomatic goof that we allowed Israel, remember that time, to use Embakasi and Kenya to enter Uganda, the 90 minutes in Entebbe. And Uganda, for a long time, we were one state, actually under the British protectorate. Kenya and Uganda was one current and the rest.
Under the protectorate, yes.
Yes, and just look at how strong is our relationship with Israel to a level that you allow now, although it was a noble idea that they were going to release Israelites that had been hijacked and were in Uganda there, but the idea is that we moved closer to Israel in that case than the neighboring Uganda. So we have a long history, and the citation has always been that we have been victims of terrorism, Norfolk, Kambala, all those had links to presence of Israel in this country. The terrorist attacks in Kambala and the Norfolk Hotel there, in that case. So Kenya, as it has been mentioned, perhaps our individual decision on the Israel-Palestine relationship might easily be genuinely concerned with our national security interests. But then how do we balance them with the context, the environment in which we're operating with a long history? So how do we appear that we want to be the champion of African affairs, the leader of Pan-Africanism, and we're not just doing that for image, it also helps you achieve your national interests and protect them if you appear to be the leader and the top of African interests. But the decisions we are making, we are really struggling that on one side we are carrying the book of the champion of Pan-Africanism and African interests, but on the other side we are appearing very transactional and raw power for individual interests. And this is seen in terms of how we are aligning. We talked about that earlier, that even in our own, I think that's my perspective, I've written about that, that in our own view that we deploy in Haiti, we are doing it in solidarity with the people of African origin. But then how we did it, it looks like the hovering shadow of the Western powers, the US, is on our neck.
Right.
You look at now our decision that we are doing in as much as it may be for our own national interest, as Prof. Nene is saying, but then the packaging and messaging that we are doing, already information within the social media and elsewhere, is that we are doing that because we are proxy of the US. So the biggest immediate struggle now for Kenya in its foreign policy, and I think with the new minister who has a bit of clout, Musalia Mudavadi, should be first to see how we can correct and deconstruct this emerging perception that we are proxy state, we are vassal state, we are no longer an anchor state, or as we were even saying, that we are moving to be a core state in the region, but we are now doing everything on behalf of another powerful state, and our interests appear to be at the back burner.
Right.
So that is the perception that we must struggle with, even as the realignments happen within the Palestine and Israel war. Just to finalize this, Zainab.
Right.
If you look at the Ukraine conflict, I think Africa slightly performed well. We remained very restrained. In fact, despite the push by Joe Biden and the world, every time there was a meeting with African leaders, the West was asking, what's your position on Ukraine? And Africans were answering well and saying, we do not want to be drawn.
It took a neutral position.
Yes, neutral position, and opposition is have peace and respect sovereignty, like that. But then we shouldn't allow, this time again, another conflict elsewhere there again, to ask Africa that take a position. Africa's position should be that of its history. We were colonized, we were oppressed, we have suffered slave trade, we have suffered terrorism, and therefore anything that contradicts that and anything that violates international law is what we are against.
But it will still go back to what Professor Munene was saying,
yes,
that then you have also individual national interest, which will then supersede that, which then if perhaps a state would feel aligned to, for example, Israel, and because of the military ties that they share, then they would take that position. So perhaps you can see it in that way?
Yes, you know, it is a maxim. When we teach students, the first statement in international relations, according to the realist theory, is that states pursue their own interests, and that's why they are there. The reason for the states, there is no free lunch in the international system. But in practice, even we tell them all states are sovereign and equal, but in practice, is that the case? So their national interests, I agree 100% with Prof here, that what drives you is your national interest. But even as you are pursuing them, ask yourself that what other elements within my environment, that's where geopolitics comes in, will affect my national interest. You can, African states and developing states do not have the muscle to be like the US, which says that their national interests are perpetual and they are crude. They cannot change. It is you to change your interests to suit their system. We have to do a lot of balancing and rebalancing.
All right.
Yes.
Dr. Abdulhab, as you make your final remarks, then perhaps a call to action for, these two states. There have been calls for a two-state, negotiation to really, together with the involvement of the international community, like you said, to sort of find a solution to this conflict that has raged on for decades, really.
Zainab, and before you answer that question, if European Union have a common understanding what is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, why can't we have Africa, 54 states of Africa, also have a common understanding towards the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? So, if we divide along the line and everybody looks for his own interest, that will jeopardize what you call a Pan-Africanism. I know our president is a Pan-Africanist. I know that. William Ruto is a Pan-Africanist. So now, I think he must have, he has to push the idea of Pan-Africanism, so that at least the African societies can read the same script towards the Palestinian Israeli conflict. But if everybody goes his own way and sees his own interest rather than the collective interest of the African continent, that will jeopardize the Pan-Africanism. And that, in fact, Kenya will go into isolation. In fact, the two issues which I disagree with my president is two issues: the issue of the Haiti and the issue of what they call the, his decision towards the Israeli, Palestinian conflict. These two issues, in fact, is not in line with Pan-Africanist movement. Again, let me come back to your question. The only solution in this conflict today, let international community come back to their own senses. Put aside the rhetoric, statement coming from the, Paris and Washington and London and Tel Aviv. That will not resolve the problem of the Israeli, Palestinian conflict. The only solution is the solution of Oslo Accord. Let them go back to Oslo Accord. Let them have two states with 1967 borders, whereby East Jerusalem will become a future, capital of the Palestine, and also they must have a two-state solution whereby the Palestinians and Israelis live together in peace and harmony. If that is being undermined and what do you call what we have seen right now and things are going is not good in the right direction. The other issue is, it's my personal view, whereby I don't see right now for the recent years, we don't see a responsible leader, leader who feel responsibility towards the global issues, specifically the Western world. So if you look at way back early 1970s, early 1960s, early 1980s, you see a responsible leader who coming in, the elected responsible leader. I don't know, the democracy has some sort of problems whereby they're going to elect any Dick and Harry, so that they can easily jeopardize what they call the stability of the globe. The only issue is let them resolve the four issues: the right of return, the issue of what they call the Jerusalem, whereby the Eastern Jerusalem became the future capital of the Palestine, an issue of the water, an issue of what they call settlements. Let the Israelis stop the settlement expansions.
So there are certainly those complex issues that need to be addressed so that that conflict can
genuinely
begin to solve the situation there. All right.
Yes. So that if they address those issues, at least under the two-state solution,
all right,
I think both Palestinians and the Israelis will have a peace.
All right, and can come to an agreement.
Yeah.
All right, Prof, if you can hear me, just less than a minute, your winding remarks.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion. That conflict I was talking about between the continental and universal ideals on one side and national interest on the other is always going to be there, but the national interests are determined by the people in power at the time. What we can do, or people can do, is to question whether the people in power deciding for a particular country know what they are doing, whether they have grand strategy, whether they have thought through some of the things that Muliro was talking about. These are part of the packages that come in examining the decision-making mechanism in a particular country. So if there is a perception that Kenya did wrong or has taken a wrong position, which is not Pan-Africanist or whatever, or collective responsibility, then the issue is not so much as Kenya doing it outside there, it is Kenya within Kenya, how it decides things. Does it have a clear objective? Does it have a vision? Does it express really the inside of the Kenyan situation? And does it take into account those other factors, the geopolitical alignment? In fact, when doing that, it's supposed to look at all those things in order to take a position, say this is what we stand for or do not stand for. So it calls for internal reassessment as to what is going on. Why would Kenya appear to be making mistakes if it's making mistakes as it did in the Haiti thing? Don't know about these other things, but there is room for self-questioning as a country.
All right.
The parliament has a role to play, and it's not playing its role properly.
Okay. Muliro, less than a minute.
Yeah, I think for me, I would say this, that Kenya in particular needs to observe very well the conflict in Israel with a mind that we pray it should not be protracted. If it is protracted, what will be the implications to our own security? What will be the implications to our own program towards Pan-Africanism? And as Prof says, the Israel-Palestine issue should be a wake-up call to Kenya to review its decision-making, especially on foreign matters, and also to review its security perspectives linked to how you communicate internationally.
All right.
And I think this is a time for us to think very strongly about our foreign service, the people who drive our foreign policy and the messaging. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Nasongo Muliro, Foreign Policy and Security Specialist from GLOSEPS. Dr. Abdulwahab Abdisamad, Founder and President of Republisphere Center for Strategic Studies, as well as Professor Macharia Munene, who's joining us virtually, historian and international relations expert, also a researcher as well. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us, Dr. Ari, as well as Bwana Muliro, for this conversation and, of course, your insights on this particular matter as we wait and see how it continues to pan out. And, of course, a lot of information. We'll be giving you more details in our news bulletins on the conflict there, Israel-Gaza, and, of course, all the developments as well. Well, this is where we wind up on AM Live, but your world is coming up shortly with Winnie Lubembe, as always. My name is Zainab Ismail. Good morning.